Hello everybody, it is Aurora and today we're going to be talking about my favorite classics. I picked five classics here, one of them in particular, a couple of them are a little bit iffy on whether you could consider them classics, but I've seen them considered as classics other places, so I'm going to consider them, but yes, very, cozy kind of. It is 8:30 p.m. and I'm wearing pajamas, so we're going to be doing this. So first up, we have our required Shakespeare play, and for me, my favorite, I don't know, this one it might be measure for measure actually, but what I still say is my favorite Shakespeare play is Shakespeare's slasher. By that I mean Titus Andronicus. Okay, so I had this one for class in college, and on the front where they have the cast list, let's find this. My God, there's a lot of introduction here. I crossed out everybody who dies, which is most of the cast. So this Titus Andronicus is about it's like one of the Rome plays, and it is about this man who kind of goes mad when how do I even explain this? The ruler ends up going for the Queen of the Goths, Tamara. Is that her name? Tamora. And Titus thinks this is wrong, and like he feeds her own son's baked in pies, and his daughter Lavinia gets her arms cut off and she's running around with her stumps, and it's a wild ride. I love it so much. Like I said, my favorite might actually be Measure for Measure. It's kind of iffy there. But I don't have Measure for Measure outside of my big like bind up of all my Shakespeare plays, so I don't know. I've only read it once, but this one, I love Titus Andronicus. Titus Andronicus is super, super fun. It might not have a page and a half full of syphilis jokes like Measure for Measure does, but it is a whole lot of fun. You can't say running around with her stumps and not love it. It's fantastic. Then this is one that and one of the ones I'm kind of iffy about counting it as a classic, but it is one that I make my 8th graders read. And that is The Chocolate War by Robert Cormier. This is a book I had to read in 8th grade, and I fell so far in love with it. This book follows Jerry Renault, who is a freshman at Trinity High School, and every year they have this annual chocolate sale, and this year Jerry decides he's going to say no. And it is so good. Like it has a lot to say about conformity and whether anybody's ever really doing their own thing, and it is just wild. It gets even wilder in the sequel, Beyond the Chocolate War, which includes a guillotine. But before Cormier went off the rails with this one, this book is so good. Like I read it too many times this year. Like I said, I make my 8th graders read this one, and we just finished it. So I had to read it to prepare it for that class. I had to go through it before every time we were talking about it in class, and the book wall gave it to me, so I had to read it on my own time. So I've read it too many times this year, but normally whenever I pick this book up, just from the first sentence onward, I'm just captured. And the first sentence is, I don't even need to look, it's they murdered him. It's so good. It is so good. And like I said, there's a wild sequel that includes a guillotine, which I love, but this is a fantastic one. It is a bit newer when you think about classic works, especially if we're going straight from Shakespeare. It came out in 1974, but it is, I think, it's seen as one of the very first young adult novels out there. It was like Cormier and S.E. Hinton out there in the 70s, so there's this one. Then, I've got some good old Steinbeck. I picked The Grapes of Wrath. I've only read 3 Steinbeck novels. I read this one, Of Mice and Men, and Cannery Row. I love Steinbeck. Steinbeck, I think, is one of the greatest American novelists of all times. I got to do a part 2 of this one because I missed Mark Twain in here, and I should have Huck Finn in here, but we'll have Steinbeck representing our fantastic American authors. Steinbeck is very concerned with the Great Depression and very concerned with farmers, and I know that sounds really boring, but The Grapes of Wrath is so good. Like, it's from like the 30s or the 40s. I think it came out. It came out in 1939. It is so accessible. Right now, my my 9th graders are reading Of Mice and Men, and well, the description does get a little bit bogged down. The dialogue is so easy. Like, the dialogue is so familiar, and that's the case with Grapes of Wrath too, but the Grapes of Wrath just, there is so much in this book that I can point to our current situation and be like, Steinbeck understood. Steinbeck really got all this. Steinbeck understood rural people. He understood the difference between that and people who live in cities. And The Grapes of Wrath is honestly the best out of the 3 that I've read from him so far. I haven't read East of Eden yet, I know, big sin, but I'm gonna get to more Steinbeck before the end of my life. I have 970 books in the book wall. It's not gonna be, soon. But I guess I don't know. The book wall sometimes gives me random stuff. So I don't know. I don't know when I'm gonna get to more Steinbeck, but I definitely will, because I picked The Grapes of Wrath, but you could put any of the Steinbeck I read in here because Steinbeck is just fantastic. So this other one, this is my other iffy one. Again, I've seen this on lists, but to me, when I read it, I didn't see it as a classic. I saw it as a straight up horror novel, and that's Perfume by Patrick Suskind. I read this because it was one of Kurt Cobain's favorite books, and it is what inspired the song Scentless Apprentice. So I read it in freshman year of college when I was really into that. But this book, it's translated from German or Dutch or something like that. I think it's German. But holy shit. This is a story about a man who was born with no scent of his own, but has this very good sense of smell, and he kind of sets out creating the perfect perfume, which ends in murder. But it is just the ending of this book, like the entirety of this book is grotesque and horrifying and fantastic. But the ending of this book, like, I remember it was freshman year of college, second semester, I was sitting in bed reading, I finished the book, and I threw it across the room, not because it was bad, because it was disgusting. Like, I've talked a lot about how horror, one of my favorite things is the gross out. Oh my god, Patrick, you did it with this one, it's fantastic. But like I said, it's a little bit iffy if you can count this one as a classic. It came out in 1986. It's pretty new, at least when you're talking about classic literature. But I've seen it included on other classic lists, so I'm going to include it because it is a fantastic, phenomenal book, and it's something. Like, that ending is holy shit. And lastly, we've got the king of them all. Honestly, I'm going to say this is my favorite classic of all time right here. This book has, man, every time I read it, it is just, I get amazed by the beauty of the language. I get amazed by how funny it actually is at points. I get amazed by how it is a straight up horror novel masquerading as your 9th grade English lesson. We're talking about Lord of the fucking Flies. Holy shit. So, Lord of the Flies. If for some reason you never had to read Lord of the Flies for school, Lord of the Flies is about a group of boys who crash land on an island, and then they all start killing each other. I've loved Lord of the Flies since the 9th grade when I had to read it for English class. I adored it. And even just as I've gotten older, I have just fallen more and more in love with the story and the writing. My god, like, Lord of the Flies brought me so much. Like, I spent a lot of time writing Lord of the Flies fanfiction as a young teenager, and it brought me, like, my best writing buddy anybody could have asked for. It brought me so much characterization skills writing all this Lord of the Flies fanfiction. I love Lord of the Flies. Like, I call it The Long Walk is my favorite book, but Lord of the Flies is honestly probably a very close second. This book did change my life as much as The Long Walk did, probably. And I'm so sad for people who don't enjoy it, because it is so good. It's so beautifully written. It's so horrifying. It's such a horrifying book. It is so horrifying. It is Roger is one of the most terrifying literary characters I can think of. Holy shit. It's fantastic. But these are 5 of my favorite classics. Like I said, we're missing Twain, so we'll probably have to do a part 2. But these are 5 of my favorite classics. But yes, that is all I have for today. I will talk to you later, and